Who are Gog and Magog? Ancient wars have always left trails of destruction, but no story is as charged with mystery and prophetic weight as the prophecy about Gog and Magog. In the heart of the Babylonian exile, when Israel seemed forgotten and hopeless, a simple man received a revelation that would change everything. He lived among spiritual ruins and foreign walls, breathing the heavy air of defeat, when the presence of the Lord broke in without warning, tearing through normality like an unexpected thunderclap in the desert. There was no prior warning, no signs that could prepare him, only the sudden invasion of divine glory into an ordinary life. The light did not come like the sun rising slowly. It exploded around him, pierced his soul, and before he could react, his knees touched the ground. Then he heard the voice no human ear can resist, a voice that did not echo in the air, but inside the spirit, burning away every fear and revealing a power that rules kingdoms and topples empires. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog. Words recorded in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 38, verse 2. In that moment, names previously unknown were branded into him like hot iron. Gog and Magog were not just distant regions or obscure characters. They were symbols of a power that would rise against God, believing itself invincible, and would be struck down by the Creator before the nations. The prophet had not asked for this vision, nor imagined he could bear such a weight, but he understood he had been chosen to witness what was to come. The message was not merely about politics or war. It was about divine sovereignty, about how human pride builds itself up only to fall. While he still trembled before the revelation, he realized that God does not merely watch history, He directs it. Even when men believe they are in control, it is the Lord who guides every step. The prophecy spoke of military alliances, colossal weapons, strategies that seemed brilliant, but that would be used for a greater purpose, to reveal to the world that no power can stand against the Most High. I will put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, declared God, as if to say that even the ambition of kings serves his plan. The exile understood that his calling was not simple. He was to announce that the pride of nations would be hooked and led to judgment like a fish lured by bait. This vision defied human logic. How could a dispersed, humiliated, and captive people become the stage for the greatest confrontation between God and the armies of the world? But the voice that spoke left no room for doubt. The Lord, who shapes empires and topples thrones, was still present, even when Israel seemed forgotten. The weight of the revelation became almost unbearable. He knew that no ordinary man should see what had been shown to him. The images were too vivid, too real. Frozen lands in the north, tribes forging weapons day and night, mighty kings on. The wars that shaped ancient empires have always left trails of blood and fleeting glory, but no prophecy is as steeped in mystery and spiritual weight as the one about Gog and Magog. When Israel seemed forgotten in the midst of the Babylonian exile, powerless and hopeless, an ordinary man was torn from routine by an experience that would change his life and the future history of nations. He lived among ruins and longings for Zion, breathing the oppression of a conquered people, when the presence of the Lord shattered the silence like thunder breaking through a cloudless sky. It was not a gentle vision, nor emotional comfort. It was a breathtaking encounter with the God who dominates kingdoms and governs destinies. The light did not rise slowly like the sun. It exploded around him, pierced his soul, and before he could understand, his knees were already touching the ground. Then came the voice that does not need air to be heard, a voice that speaks straight to the spirit, burns away fear, and reveals the absolute power of the Most High. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the sovereign prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, as it is written in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 38, verse 2. In that moment, names that had never crossed his mind were branded like hot iron into his being. Gog and Magog were not just distant peoples. They symbolized a future coalition of human power, unrestrained pride, and military ambition that would dare to challenge the Creator. The calling was overwhelming. God was inviting him to witness the unfolding of a cosmic plot where divine sovereignty would be revealed before the entire world. He, an ordinary exile, was now chosen as a prophet to announce a future where kings would trust in their own strength, only to be led to judgment. It was impossible not to feel fear. The man who lived among the deportees of Babylon now saw far beyond the empire's walls. He could see from God's perspective the invisible thread that moves history. He understood that the Most High does not just observe human plans, he manipulates them when he chooses. Political alliances, weapons forged in secret, armies trained to conquer, none of it is outside divine control. "I will put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army," says the Lord in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 4, as if revealing that even the arrogance of the powerful is used to fulfill his eternal purposes. The experience made it clear that what was coming was not just another war among men. It was a cosmic demonstration of who rules the universe. The prophet realized that human history is not a series of random events. It has direction, even when it seems chaotic. God allows pride to grow so he can later expose its fragility before everyone. This realization shatters the illusion of control that emperors and generals believe they hold, and brings hope to the oppressed who think they have been abandoned. The weight of the calling was almost unbearable. He saw, with chilling detail, frozen lands in the far north, tribes gathering around a charismatic leader, forges burning day and night to produce unprecedented weapons, strategic plans being drawn over, massive maps. Each image carried a silent certainty. Everything was moving toward a specific day when the Creator would act undeniably. This man, who until then had been just an exile, understood that he had been set apart to narrate something the world would need to know. He had not asked for this burden, but he knew he could not ignore it. The silence after the vision was deafening because he knew the future had already begun to move. History still seemed distant, but the hand of God was already positioning each piece. And as he tried to process what he had witnessed, he felt there was something even deeper to be revealed. Something that would explain not only what would happen, but why God would allow such a rise of human power before judgment. The vision did not end with the impact of the first revelation. Days later, while the prophet was still trying to comprehend the weight of what had been shown to him, a new spiritual experience completely overtook him. There were no sounds around, only a silence that seemed alive, and suddenly he found himself before a simple yet profoundly disturbing scene. The hand of the Lord held a gigantic hook, glowing like incandescent metal, descending into invisible waters. At its tip was an irresistible bait, not made of food but of pride, ambition, and the promise of unlimited power. In the darkness of those symbolic waters, a force was approaching. The prophet immediately recognized what was happening. Gog was the fish, a leader driven by his own arrogance, believing he was building an invincible empire, yet in reality being led to the exact point where he would face judgment. Then the divine voice broke the silence once more, now clear and direct. "I will put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor." Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 4. It was in that moment that the exile understood something that would forever transform his perception of human power and God's actions. The political alliances Gog was sealing, the tribes he was drawing with promises of wealth, the colossal weapons being forged day and night, none of it was a free movement. It was a carefully allowed game by the Creator to reveal who truly governs history. Gog believed he was in control, but he was being led like a hooked fish, deceived by his own thirst for greatness. This revelation was not merely about geopolitics or military strategies. It was living theology before the prophet's eyes. He saw that God is not just a distant spectator, but the absolute Lord, who even turns human rebellion into a stage for his glory. When powerful men unite, thinking that strength and gold are enough, it is God himself who clears their path, not for victory, but for downfall. Pride becomes a trap, Ambition turns into an invisible chain pulling them where they never imagined going. The spiritual weight of this understanding was devastating. Until then, the prophet might have thought that evil grew beyond divine reach, that wicked nations acted because God was silent. But now he saw that the silence of the Most High is strategy, not absence. Divine patience does not mean weakness. It means he allows pride to reach its peak so that it can be broken before everyone. The Lord frustrates the plans of the nations and thwarts the purposes of the peoples. Psalm 33 verse 10. But he does this at the right time, when no one can deny his hand. The vision of the hook was unsettling because it showed God using even human sin as a tool for his purposes. Gog thought he was manipulating kings and buying loyalties. He did not realize that every step was directed by wisdom far higher than any military council. The prophet saw maps being drawn, strategies emerging, generals meeting in secret, all believing they were in command. But behind every decision, there was an invisible direction. It was like watching an arrogant king build his own gallows with his own hands, believing he was raising a throne. This understanding brought hope, but also fear. Hope because no human power is truly sovereign. Fear because the pride guiding Gog can also inhabit any heart. If God hooks kings, he can also confront any man who trusts in his own strength. The exile realized that this message was not only for distant rulers, it was a warning for all who believe they own their destiny. As he reflected, the image became even clearer. The hook did not just catch, but pulled with irresistible gentleness. There was no real struggle because the fish believed it was swimming freely. Gog thought each military victory was the result of his genius, each alliance the fruit of his diplomacy, each conquest proof of his invincibility. But each move drew him deeper into the divine plan, to the exact place where he would be humiliated before the nations. The prophet began to see that even before the battle, victory already belonged to the Lord. Evil might seem triumphant, but it walks into its own trap. This is the essence of divine judgment, letting arrogance ripen until there is no excuse when it is broken. That is why the Bible declares that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. James chapter 4 verse 6. Gog did not know it, but every step he took was another link in the invisible chain dragging him towards certain defeat. The message was so powerful that it forever changed the way the prophet looked at the world. Empires that seemed unshakable, alliances that seemed indestructible, armies that considered themselves invincible, all could simply be fish biting the hook of the God who controls history. This awareness brought peace amid exile and courage to announce what was coming, even before kings who mocked the God of Israel. Still, the revelation did not stop there. The Lord showed that the line between the pride of a king and the pride of a people is thin. Gog was only the face of something much greater, collective human arrogance, the belief that man can rule without bowing to the Creator. This sin is not limited to a leader of the North. It inhabits every society that forgets who sustains the universe. As the vision faded, the prophet felt the scene widen before his eyes. He had already understood that Gog was being led like a fish to the divine hook. Now he began to see something more, how that arrogance growing in the north would give rise to an army so powerful and terrifying that the entire world would believe Israel was about to be wiped off the map. And yet, that same army was walking step by step to become a living testimony of God's sovereignty before all nations. The previous visions had already shown that Gog's pride would be hooked by the invisible hand of God. But now, the prophet began to see this plan unfold within human history. As if watching a giant board being set up, he saw frozen lands in the far north, where isolated tribes struggled to survive cold and scarcity, slowly being united by an irresistible force. It was not a simple cultural or commercial union, but a summons marked by ambition, wealth, and the promise of absolute power. A man rose among them, imposing, charismatic, a strategist, and his name was Gog, Prince of Magog. Caravans appeared like endless rivers crossing frozen plains. Harsh men, warriors hardened by life's brutality, marched in response to the call of a leader who offered them glory and dominion. Each step was taken with confidence, Each gaze carried the belief that nothing could stop them. The prophet watched as once rival kingdoms became allies, driven by the greed to share in a future empire. This process seemed purely human, born of diplomacy and military strength, but he knew that behind every silent agreement was the hand of God guiding history. The forges work without rest. Night and day the fire burns high, spitting sparks as men shape weapons that had never existed before. Shields so large they reflect the sun like mirrors, war chariots reinforced with rare metals, armor that seems to turn simple soldiers into steel colossi. The sound of hammers echoes like a heart beating in the darkness, a sign that something gigantic is taking shape. This is not just ordinary weaponry, it is a frenzied race for supremacy, an arsenal meant to dominate and intimidate the entire world. The prophet sees maps being drawn on tables covered with hides and scrolls. Generals calculate routes, evaluate passes, plan sieges. Nothing is improvised. Every detail is studied with surgical precision. Every move is designed to guarantee total victory. Israel appears on these maps as the ultimate goal, the desired territory, the coveted target. The heart of Gog beats with an ancient desire to conquer what belongs to God and prove that human strength can subjugate the land he chose. At this point, the vision takes on darker contours. The prophet realizes that this is not just about a future war. It is a portrait of human nature when it turns away from God. Pride, greed, and self-sufficiency feed alliances that ignore justice and truth. Gog is only the visible face of a greater rebellion spreading like a contagion among nations. Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all the multitude that has gathered to you, echoes the voice of God recorded in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 7, not as encouragement, but as an announcement that he allows this preparation to reveal his glory at the right moment. As the northern tribes unite, emissaries arrive from distant lands. Eastern kings send gold and soldiers. Western leaders offer technology and resources. It is a global coalition growing silently but with relentless strength. Every nation involved believes it is investing in a certain victory, but in reality, it is enlisting in the greatest judgment the world has ever seen. The prophet feels the moral tension of this scene. Men sell their convictions for promises of power. Entire kingdoms sacrifice values in exchange for fleeting conquests. The arrogance of Gog reaches almost divine levels. He sees himself as Lord of War, destined to rewrite the world map. His voice inspires fear and obedience. His eyes shine with ambition that seems without limits. Soldiers march under newly created banners. Songs of victory echo before any battle has even begun. For them, defeat does not exist. It is the height of human confidence without God, an empire built on the illusion of invincibility. The prophet feels the spiritual weight of this moment. There are no visible signs of divine intervention yet. Everything seems to favor Gog, and it is precisely here that the danger lies. God's silence feeds the illusion of autonomy, but the one who has seen the hook knows that this advance is not freedom, it is leading. The leader who thinks he is the hunter is, in truth, the prey. The prophet sees how each apparent victory, each military conquest, each strengthened alliance is just another link in the chain that will drag all this power to the exact place where it will be broken. The images intensify. Columns of soldiers advancing like swarms across vast plains, entire cities emptying as young warriors march north, driven by dreams of wealth and glory. Workshops produce war machines never seen before, weapons capable of launching fire over impossible distances, vehicles reinforced to withstand any attack, armor that makes men nearly impenetrable. To the outside eye, this army seems invincible. The prophet, however, knows that human invincibility is fragile when confronted by the Creator. It is impossible not to feel the clash between appearance and reality. Gog's coalition rises as the greatest military power in history, but in God's eyes, it is merely a parade marching toward its own judgment. Arrogance does not realize it is galloping toward its fall. The prophet, filled with a mixture of fear and compassion, watches in silence. He understands that every hammer strike in the forges, every alliance sealed in secret, every soldier recruited is just another step toward the day when the Lord will show the world that no force can stand against him. As the vision stretches on, the prophet senses that something greater is approaching. The stage is complete, a leader unbeatable in human eyes, an unprecedented army, a global coalition driven by the thirst for conquest. Everything seems prepared for a crushing victory against Israel. But he knows, because he saw the hand that holds the hook, that this path does not lead to Gog's glory, but to the stage of divine judgment. God's silence is not abandonment, it is strategy. The storm has not yet begun, but the air already carries the tension of something unstoppable about to break forth. The scenario built over the years seemed definitive. Gog's army, now an uncontested force, advanced like a dark tide that nothing could stop. Distant tribes, powerful kingdoms, and opportunistic allies marched under a single banner, certain that Israel would easily fall. The prophet saw it all approaching like an inevitable storm, each step echoing over the land like war drums. And then the day came. It was not announced by human trumpets, nor preceded by any solemn warning. It simply arrived. The sun rose like on any other morning, but there was something strange in the air. A silence heavier than usual, a sudden cold that made animals stir without reason. The wind ceased abruptly, as if the world itself had held its breath. The prophet felt an almost tangible tension, as if all creation awaited something monumental. He remembered God's words. On that day, there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, such that the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the animals of the field will tremble. Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 19. From the north, a colossal cloud began to rise on the horizon, not made of vapor or rain, but of dust lifted by countless feet and hooves. It was as if night had fallen in the middle of the day. The sound followed, a continuous, deep, crushing roar, formed by the synchronized march of thousands of soldiers and the grinding of colossal war machines. The ground shook with every moment, and the prophet from afar nearly lost his balance as he felt the earth tremble. When the first contingent appeared, the sight took his breath away. Men clad in steel, chariots reinforced with gleaming metal, banners fluttering with symbols declaring victory before the battle even began. Gog himself rode at the front, mounted on a colossal horse, confident, haughty, radiating the conviction that no one could resist his power. The army seemed endless. Columns upon columns passed without end, a current of war swallowing the horizon. To any human eye, there was no hope for Israel. But the prophet knew that God's silence was not absence. It was preparation. And the first sign came subtly, almost imperceptibly. The earth trembled in a different way, deep, not caused by human steps. An ancient vibration, as if the very foundations of the world were shifting. Animals went mad. Birds took flight in desperation. Dogs and horses began to panic uncontrollably. Soldiers looked around confused, unable to understand nature's sudden unrest. Then the sky roared. Not an ordinary thunder, but a sound so powerful it seemed to tear the very firmament apart. It was as if something immense had been forced open. The prophet fell with his face to the ground, overcome by reverent fear and unshakable certainty. The Creator was intervening. On that day I will be magnified, sanctified, and known in the eyes of many nations. They shall know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 23. Light broke through the heavens in an indescribable way. It was not the brightness of the sun, but a radiance that burned the eyes and seared the soul. From it came columns of fire descending like living rain, striking with supernatural precision the strategic points of the enemy army. The first impact hit Gog's command tent, exploding with such intense heat that the prophet, miles away, felt his skin burn. In seconds, thousands of soldiers were consumed as if they had never existed. But the fire was only the beginning. From the sky fell massive stones mixed with incandescent hail, piercing armor as if it were paper. Devastating winds arose out of nowhere, uprooting entire trees and hurling them against war chariots. Chaos was instant. The impeccable organization of the world's greatest army dissolved into absolute panic. Men ran aimlessly, screams mixed with wails, horses reared and fled in desperation. But the fire was only the beginning. From the sky fell massive stones mixed with incandescent hail, piercing armor as if it were paper. Devastating winds arose out of nowhere, uprooting entire trees and hurling them against war chariots. Chaos was instant. The impeccable organization of the world's greatest army dissolved into absolute panic. Men ran aimlessly, screams mixed with wails, horses reared and fled in desperation. Then something even more terrifying happened. Confusion among the soldiers themselves. Without apparent reason, allies began fighting each other. Swords meant to defend comrades now cut familiar throats. Generals tried to stop the madness, but were swallowed by chaos. The prophecy was fulfilled before the prophet's eyes. I will summon a sword against him on all my mountains. Every man's sword will be against his brother. Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 21. In less than an hour, what had seemed the greatest military force in history lay in ruins. Bodies were scattered across the valleys, destroyed chariots burned in flames, and the dust raised by the triumphant march was now black smoke rising to the heavens. Gog, who had marched arrogantly at the front of all, was now just another among thousands fallen. No human sword had defended Israel. It was God himself who intervened with uncontestable power. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you want to bless the channel, click on the Super Thanks button and leave an offering of any amount, or become a member, so we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Continuing, the prophet, hidden on a high point, watched everything with a mixture of awe and fear. It was impossible not to feel the greatness of a God who topples empires without needing human armies. The entire world would witness this scene and understand that no earthly power can resist the creator of the universe. The silence that followed the divine storm was not ordinary peace. It was a heavy silence, full of reverence, as if the very earth acknowledged who reigns over it. But as he looked at the devastated field, the prophet realized this was only the beginning of something even greater. The destruction of Gog was not the end of the story, but the start of a new time that would change entire nations and redefine humanity's relationship with God. The earth was in shock, the heavens had spoken, but the lesson to come would reach the world in a way he was yet to understand. When the dust of battle settled, what remained before human eyes was an unforgettable scene. Where once there had been green valleys and caravan routes, there was now a burned field, covered with ashes and the remains of what had once been the greatest army on earth. The smell of sulfur and death hung in the air, heavy, almost suffocating. No songs of victory were heard, because there had been no human combat. The silence dominating the landscape was full of awe and fear, as if even creation itself were in reverence of what it had witnessed. The prophet walked slowly among the wreckage, aware that every detail of this scene was the exact fulfillment of the word the Lord had revealed to him years before. Bodies were scattered in every direction, some burned beyond recognition, others reduced to ashes, leaving only empty armor. Destroyed war chariots formed piles of twisted metal. Weapons that had seemed invincible now lay broken, useless. Everything men had created with such pride had turned to dust in moments. And they fell on the mountains of Israel. And I sent fire on Magog, and among those who dwell securely in the islands, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 6. The prophecy was no longer a distant promise. It was living history beneath the feet of the people. Soon the first survivors from nearby cities began to appear, driven by fear and curiosity. Some came searching for relatives who would never return. Others simply wanted to confirm the rumors spreading like wildfire. An army no one could defeat had been destroyed without a single Israeli sword being raised. Seeing the devastated valley, many fell to their knees. Some wept, others remained in absolute silence, unable to comprehend such a display of power. There was no doubt God had fought for his people. But the divine victory also brought a heavy and unavoidable task. The battlefield needed to be purified. The prophet understood that this place could not remain as it was. The Lord himself had determined that Israel should cleanse the land to remove the contamination left by the enemies. On that day I will give Gog a place of burial in Israel, the valley of those who pass east of the sea. And there they will bury Gog and all his multitude, and it will be called the Valley of Hamon-Gog. Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 11. Then began a monumental work that would last for months. Men were summoned from all regions to search for scattered bones and remains. Every piece of armor, every fragment of weapon, every body that could be identified was carefully gathered. It was a holy and somber task at the same time, an act of purification before God. The valley was chosen as a collective burial ground, a permanent memorial of the fall of human arrogance before the sovereignty of the Most High. There, the pride of entire nations turned to dust and was buried as a warning for all generations. For 7 months they searched without ceasing. Patrols traveled the land, marking each skeleton they found with stakes so that others could come and collect it. Entire families joined in this cleansing, even though it was hard and emotionally devastating work. It was not merely about hygiene or safety, it was a spiritual act. Every bone found and buried reminded them that God fulfills His word, that no military power can resist His outstretched arm. Every weapon removed was a silent reminder that He turns evil into something that serves the good of His people. And then something surprising happened with the arsenal left behind. Instead of simply melting down the metal to forge new weapons, the people began using it as fuel. Shields became firewood for bonfires, spears and swords were burned in furnaces, war chariots were dismantled to feed the flames that warmed homes and cooked meals. What had been created to destroy now brought heat and sustenance. Those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set fire to the weapons. For 7 years they will burn them. Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 9. For 7 long years no one needed to cut trees for firewood. Gog's pride was transformed into provision for the people he wanted to annihilate. As the work advanced, rumors spread beyond the borders. Messengers carried news of the catastrophe to distant palaces. Powerful kings who had considered supporting Gog were shocked to hear that such an invincible army had been destroyed without human resistance. Royal counselors whispered in silence, trying to understand how such a great force had been undone in a single day. Merchants who had invested fortunes in the war campaign lost everything and now feared the God who turned their hopes to ashes. Entire peoples who had never heard of the Lord of Israel now asked who this God was, who topples empires without human armies. The prophet saw this movement with spiritual eyes. He understood that God not only saved Israel, He was revealing His glory to the nations. Gog's disaster was a silent sermon preached to kings and distant peoples, showing that history does not belong to men. It was a sign that would echo through generations. The Lord controls the destiny of kingdoms and does not allow human arrogance to prevail forever. This message spread faster than any trade, deeper than any political speech. Despite the relief of victory, the atmosphere in Israel was not one of ordinary celebration. There was a reverent fear in every heart. The people understood that they had not won by their own strength, but because the God who promised to protect His land had kept His word. Each fire lit with the enemy's weapons was a silent reminder. The Lord transforms what was made to destroy into a resource to sustain. Each skeleton buried in the valley of Hamon-Gog was a permanent marker of divine justice. And as the work of cleansing continued, something began to change in the world beyond Israel. Distant nations reconsidered their paths, kingdoms adjusted strategies, rulers who planned wars hesitated. Fear and awe of the God of Israel grew silently, reaching even the most prideful palaces. The prophet perceived that Gog's destruction did not end on the battlefield. It began a slow but profound transformation that would start to reshape how nations viewed power, security, and divinity. The valley was being purified, but the impact of that day was already reaching far beyond the land that witnessed the judgment. An invisible change was beginning to touch hearts in places the prophet could not yet fully see, preparing the world for a new understanding of the God who reigns over all. The fall of Gog was not just an isolated episode, limited to the valley where heaven's fire consumed men and war machines. The impact of this event reverberated beyond Israel's borders, like waves spreading when a giant stone is thrown into a silent lake. The prophet, still carrying in his eyes the images of the charred battlefield, began to have visions of what was happening in distant lands. He saw palaces, markets, roads, and entire villages reacting to the news that an army considered invincible had been crushed in a single day, not by human hands, but by the Creator himself. In the golden corridors of palaces, kings who once conspired against Israel now trembled like ordinary men. Counselors whispered in their ears, bringing reports that seemed impossible to believe. War chariots reduced to ashes, mighty soldiers consumed in an instant, generals falling amidst the confusion of their own allies. Some monarchs tried to deny it, saying it was exaggeration from messengers, but others received confirmations from different sources, all describing the same scene of divine terror. A pharaoh, seated on a throne covered in gold, trembled upon hearing that no army could resist the God of Israel. For the first time, he recognized that there was a power far greater than his own. In commercial cities, merchants who had invested fortunes supplying weapons, horses, and provisions for Gog wept in despair. What they expected as profit turned into ruin. They lost not only money, but faith in their own calculations. They realized that the world is not sustained only by the logic of business, but by the judgment of a God who can, in an instant, turn wealth to dust. In their markets and fairs, the voice of the people no longer spoke about prices or goods, but about the God who topples empires with wind, fire, and hail. The reaction among common people was even deeper. The prophet saw a farmer in his field who, upon hearing the news of his brother's deaths after marching with Gog, dropped his hoe and knelt on the soft earth. His tears were not only of mourning, but of painful recognition. His brothers died because they followed a man who dared to defy the Creator. For the first time in his life, he lifted his eyes to heaven and asked about eternity, about justice, about who really governs human destiny. The prophet also saw a woman in a port city, used to welcoming foreign soldiers seeking pleasure before war. She clearly remembered men who promised to return rich and never came back. When she heard that all were dead, something changed in her soul. For the first time, she questioned if there was a God who saw her, who loved her despite her choices, who called her to a different life. The destruction of Gog not only ruined empires but awakened individual consciences, pulling men and women out of their spiritual indifference. In another vision, the prophet beheld a young soldier who had deserted Gog's army shortly before the invasion. Something in his heart had warned him, perhaps childhood memories of hearing stories about the God of Israel. He fled to the mountains and survived. Now he returned to his village as the only survivor among thousands of comrades. People looked at him like a ghost, unable to understand how he escaped. But he knew. It was not chance. It was divine preservation. For the rest of his life, he would testify to everyone that the Lord is real, that his hand reaches even in the midst of judgment. The visions did not stop. The prophet saw generals from distant kingdoms who had almost sent troops to support Gog now trembling in secret. Their hesitation to join the war had saved their lives. They understood that God's hand had kept them from sharing the same fate. In their private chambers, they murmured words filled with awe. Who is this God who destroys armies without lifting a human sword? Questions once ignored now burned in their hearts. Even thieves and opportunists felt the weight of judgment. A man who had stolen money from families who lost sons to Gog's army could no longer bear the guilt when he realized he had exploited widows and orphans. He returned everything he had taken, trying to find peace for his soul. It was as if Gog's death had set a mirror before humanity, showing everyone not only the failure of human power, but the moral fragility within every heart. The effect spread like an invisible current. Entire nations changed their plans. Armies ready to invade neighbors were disbanded. War councils were dissolved. The fear of the God of Israel became stronger than any sword. It was as if the entire world had heard a sermon without words, a message written in fire and hail declaring, "The Lord reigns, and before him all arrogance falls." The prophet now understood that Gog's destruction was not just deliverance for Israel, but a teaching for humanity. The Lord had shown everyone that there is no king strong enough, no nation rich enough, no army powerful enough to challenge his rule. This domino effect spread to the four corners of the earth. reaching from kings in palaces to simple workers in the fields. But while the news transformed kingdoms and awakened consciences, the prophet realized that God was not yet finished. The judgment of Gog had opened the way for something greater, for an even more glorious revelation that would rise on the horizon of history. The echo of that day would not be only of fear, but of preparation for the manifestation of the true king who was yet to come. As the years passed, the world seemed to have changed. The fear of the God of Israel spread like a strong, silent, but transforming wind. Nations that once lived by war began to rethink their paths. Kings who witnessed or heard of Gog's fall began to seek wisdom before conquering territories. Entire peoples tried to live in peace, as if they had understood that no human power can stand against the Lord. Israel, too, experienced a time of tranquility, unlike anything it had known. Children played where once there had been corpses and burned war chariots. The air felt lighter, the borders seemed safe, and many believed that a new era had arrived. It was in this environment that the prophet received his last great vision. He was already an old man, marked by decades of memories few could bear to carry. The light that had once surrounded him in exile came back just as intensely, but now bringing a solemn peace mixed with reverence. It was no longer a vision of armies and destruction. It was something greater, deeper, something that transcended any human war. First, he saw a transformed world. Nations that once hated each other now walked together. Swords were turned into farming tools. Spears became sickles. It was the fulfillment of the ancient prophets. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. Children played in fields that had once been stained with blood, and the land seemed to breathe relief after centuries of violence. The prophet was moved to see the partial fulfillment of what he had always dreamed of, an age of peace, where the Lord reigned in Jerusalem, and kings of the earth came to acknowledge his sovereignty. But as he contemplated this peace, something unexpected began to surface. He perceived that even in this almost perfect setting, the human heart still held shadows. Some men kept secret unrest, silent resistance, unanswered questions. It was as if, even amid daily miracles and true justice, there remained within man a stubborn desire to be his own God. This revelation was more frightening to the prophet than any army he had ever seen. He understood that rebellion does not die merely with displays of power. It remains latent, waiting for the moment to resurface. Then God showed him something even greater than the fall of Gog. The vision changed tone. The sky, which had once held the gentle light of peace, began to open again, but now in a different way. There was no fire of judgment falling on enemies. There was an indescribable light, so intense that all previous images seemed dark in comparison. From within this light came a majestic figure, mounted on a white horse. His eyes were like flames of fire, and on his thigh was written a name no one dared ignore: King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Behind him came heavenly armies also mounted on white horses, radiant and prepared not for an ordinary war, but to reign. It was the fulfillment of what Revelation describes. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and makes war. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written: King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 and 16. The scene was of a grandeur impossible to contain in words. The prophet understood that if Gog and his army had been impressive in human eyes, the one who now appeared did not need fire, earthquakes, or confusion to win. His mere presence dissolved all opposition like smoke before the sun. Kings of the earth ran to caves trying to hide. The mighty cried out to the mountains to fall on them. But there was no possible refuge. The true sovereign had arrived. He saw the king ride to the very valley where Gog had been destroyed, now cleansed and silent. There, where human arrogance died, the Messiah established his throne. From his mouth came a sharp sword, symbol of absolute authority, able to judge nations with a single decree. And he will rule them with a rod of iron. Revelation chapter 19, verse 15. It was the closing of the era when men believed they could govern without God. It was not a battle, it was a coronation. The prophet understood that all the rise and fall of Gog had not been just an isolated act of judgment, but preparation for this moment. The Lord allowed human pride to reach its peak to show that no power can resist the king who is to come. The destruction of Gog was a prologue, a clear warning, but also an opportunity for the nations to recognize who truly reigns. Now, in the final vision, he saw the complete fulfillment. Every tongue confessing, every knee bowing, all peoples understanding that the dominion belongs eternally to the Lamb and to the Lord of hosts. It was impossible not to feel both fear and hope at the same time. Fear, because all human pride will be broken before this king. Hope, because he comes to establish ultimate justice, restore what was lost, and bring a peace no man could ever achieve. The prophet, now old and weary, knew that his mission was coming to an end. He carried on his back the memory of destroyed armies, and in his soul the certainty of an eternal kingdom drawing near. As the vision faded, he did not hear a farewell, nor a triumphant closing. He felt only the silent and absolute presence of the God who guides all of history. The image of the white horse and the victorious king remained engraved in his heart as an eternal seal. He knew that the time of men ends when the one who is faithful and true decides to manifest his reign. And he understood that the calling he had received in his youth, when he first heard of Gog and Magog, was, in fact, an invitation to witness the last great lesson. No human throne stands before the Lord of history, and no rebellious heart escapes the day when the true king will come to take what has always been his. See you next time.